We've got questions from a bunch of our subscribers on Patreon. We're keeping those and we'll do an actual mailbag episode. I'm going to certainly try and get either David or Jessie to come back.
Not a chance.
To answer.
And this is why you've been given a co-host.
So for anyone else that has got any other questions you want to ask around politics of, by the sounds of it, Jessie or myself, please subscribe to our Patreon community, and then in the chat on the page you'll see where you can ask questions, and we'll endeavour to answer them. Welcome to another episode of Socially Democratic. This week, Jessie and David jockey for the title of World's Best Podcast Guest, while I remain the cool, collected centre as usual. It's been a month full of headlines, from the Tasmanian election to a very public fight within the Greens political party. Albanese went to China, Mark Latham went straight to the bin where he belongs, and Jessie has an axe to grind with social media advice in the Sydney Morning Herald. Finally, you'll never believe it, David has something nice to say about a journalist. It's all coming up after a word from our sponsors. The presenting sponsor for Socially Democratic is Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We only work with people who want to build power to make the world a better place. And if you want to create change in 2025, then hit us up at dunstreet.com.au. A special shout out to all of our Patreon members as well. And you can join our community for free or for as little as $1.50 a month. And you too can help support this podcast. All paid members receive a welcome gift. So if you have recently signed up, please check your inbox for a message from our producer asking for your shipping address, because without that, then we can't send you your merch. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. For over a century, Maurice Blackburn has stood up for fairness, championing the rights of everyday Australians and shaping landmark legal reforms. Today, they're harnessing new technologies to make justice more accessible, more efficient, and more responsive to the needs of modern Australia. All right, let's get on with today's episode. We are taping this one on a wet, soggy, yucky Tuesday afternoon on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. It is the end of the month. That means it is another edition of the Feeney Files with Jessie McCrone, where we wrap up the month that was in Australian and international politics. And I'm going to do that obviously with my two favourite citizens. He's the former member for Batman and a former ALP party secretary, David Feeney. Welcome back to Socially Democratic.
It's a pleasure to appear as a guest on the McCrone Memorandum, the show previously known as the Feeney Files. Great to be back.
And she's a former Deputy Chief of Staff to Daniel Andrews and now partner at FMRS Advisory, Jessie McCrone. Welcome back.
I'm pleased to be here because I understand Lizzie Ratcliffe's podcast went so well that there was a chance I was going to be bumped. David, you and I both thrown off this segment.
I can talk you through how that feels if you ever when Stephen just takes you out of the program. I can have a chat to you about how abrupt and jarring it can be.
Coping mechanisms.
While those two talk amongst themselves and form a union, for those of you playing along at home, this is how these new episodes are going to be structured. Actually, I think I'm also saying this for the benefit of our two guests as well, so they know how this episode is going to be structured.
Yeah.
What we're going to do is we're going to open with the top headlines of the month and then get some reflections from both David and Jessie. And then we'll move to the main topic of discussion. In this case today, it's going to be the Tasmanian state election that happened on Saturday. Then Jessie gets the floor to share her thoughts on some good or poor political communication that she has seen over the course of the last 4 weeks. And then David has an opportunity to talk about Syria for another 3 or 4 hours. And then we're going to wrap it up with our categories. And the categories that we're going to stick with for the foreseeable future anyway is obviously Tory with a typewriter. And that could be both Tory or Tree Tory. The Mel Meninga In Over My Head award and as usual, the probably unanswerable questions plus mailbag, which we're getting some questions from our Patreon subscribers. Makes sense? Wonderful. Okay, let's go to the headlines for the month of July, starting with the Coalition hits record lows in Newspoll in the first Newspoll since the May 3rd federal election. Labor leads with a two-party preferred vote of 57 to 43, while the Coalition's primary vote has collapsed to just under 29%. It's the lowest in Newspoll history. Labor's primary is at 36%. Susan Well, Sussan Ley, the Liberal leader, is scraping with just a 35% approval rating, while the PM sits at around 47. Second news item is that the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, visited China to make diplomatic waves. Anthony Albanese returned from a high-profile visit to China where he met with President Xi Jinping. The visit marks the 10th anniversary of Australia's free trade agreement with China, and both nations have agreed to review the deal in a bid to strengthen economic ties. Notably, Xi didn't mention the 99-year port of Darwin lease or the US pressure on allies over Taiwan. Also missing from the talks, Australia's foreign investment rules restricting Chinese ownership of critical infrastructure. However, the Prime Minister did raise concerns about the Chinese Navy and their live fire exercises off the coast of Lake Entrance. It's been the most exciting thing that's ever happened to Lake Entrance in 120 years. Parliament returns with HEX reform on the table. Parliament returns this week for the first time since Labor's historic election victory, and top of the agenda is the proposed legislation to cut student HEX by 20%. And finally, New South Wales politician allegedly into scat porn. Former One Nation New South Wales Labor leader Mark Latham is back at the headlines, and for the wrong reasons again. His former partner has sought an AVO against him in court, citing allegations of threatening and abusive behaviour. It's the latest in a long line of controversy surrounding Latham, and a further reminder of how toxic the far-right fringes of politics have become. Lots has happened in the last month. David, to you, the news poll came out. Your reflections on the first poll. And why do we do this? I mean, it's like, is this the most irrelevant of all polls you can do? The ink has barely dried on 18 million ballot papers, and news poll just wants to double check how things are going. If anything, it's more a way of trolling how bad the Liberals are. And I guess it's going to be fodder for the anti-Sussan Ley faction that wants to roll her, even though she's only been in the job 20 minutes.
Yeah, well, I mean, sometimes they throw up interesting results. I'm thinking of in the United Kingdom where, after a big election victory, the Labor government's popularity there started to tank very, very fast. The good news is that's not the Australian story, and this is really a measurement of how nothing succeeds like success, and the fact that Labor has won the election in the manner it did, and it's got this momentum, and Australians perceive that means that they've rallied around what they see as a successful government. And as you say, who cares what the Liberal Party is saying just at the moment? I mean, the Sussan has obviously got a mighty job ahead of her, and the enemy within will dog her steps. There was some interesting commentary this week about how Albo and Labor will pivot to the new challenge of debating a woman at the dispatch box when they're accustomed to debating Dutton, and so that far more sort of muscular and testosterone-fueled debate will have to give way to something new. And I personally don't think that's going to be a giant challenge for Labor, because I think firstly, I don't underestimate for a moment our Prime Minister and his capacity to modulate his approach, but also I would think the most striking strategy for Labor at the moment would be to ignore Sussan and her adventures. She's going to be desperately working to try and modernise the Liberal Party, introduce it to the female gender in a political context, bring it into something approaching this millennia. Her work is cut out for her, and I think one of the best things Labor could do at the moment is ignore her. So happy times, a poll that confirms the strength and momentum of the government.
Wonderful. Jessie, your take on the recent pointless poll that came out?
Look, I think that they're mostly designed so that journalists later can point at this high watermark after a party has been elected to then say how far they've fallen is the general idea of them.
So cynical.
I also think, though, what it does demonstrate is while the political class and possibly the political class, certainly journalists, were very surprised by this result, the people weren't. And if they were, I think we would have seen a little bit less positive reinforcement of the result. after news poll. So while everyone was a bit like, oh, is this going to be a minority government, which it definitely wasn't, I don't think the public has recoiled from the result. And I think that's a good thing. I'm hoping that means that, and particularly the timing with going into Parliament, I'm hoping that means that Labor can go in with the confidence that they should have after that election victory, and it's only being reinforced.
Yeah.
David, China and the visit of the Prime Minister. The way that it was reported in the media, there was lots of things that didn't get talked about, but I'm interested to get your reflections on that trip. From my perspective, it looked like a success, but I'm interested to see what you think about the outcomes from the visit.
Yes, well, of course it was a success, and it was a success for Australia and it was a success for China, and that duality drove a number of journalists around the twist. It was a success for Australia because our Prime Minister got to spend some time in China dealing with the Chinese leadership and indeed with President Xi himself and talking about issues that are of consequence to Australia and most especially Australian trade and economic interests. But I thought the other thing that it brought into stark relief was how China has really positioned itself to profit from the madness of Washington, D.C. Because one thing Albo knew going to China was that he wasn't going to sit in an office and get ambushed with a video that Steve Bannon made talking about Australia and then, be attacked by it was a professional meeting consistent with the traditional conventions of diplomacy, strengthening our bilateral ties and building the relationship. It wasn't Captain Ambush launching himself on Albo in front of the global press. And I guess that just brings into stark relief, doesn't it, how the US decline, it sort of, as it eviscerates its own soft power, it elicits different reactions. And one of the reactions it elicits from the likes of the Australian newspaper is a growing sense of panic about the state of the US leadership of the world and the state of the US alliance. And as we've discussed before, everyone's, a large number of journalists are kind of banging their plates together saying, until you have a face-to-face with Trump, the US relationship hasn't the Australia's relationship with the United States is in disrepair, and that's just utter nonsense. And as we've discussed before, why should Albo go into such a high-risk, low-reward meeting in Washington, D.C.? He will meet Trump in due course, but at the moment it's just the journos looking for him to get a hiding at the hands of the Orange Man about Australian defence spending or rare earths or zinc.
It just shows that their approach is more about setting a benchmark for him than actually hoping for Australia's success. Like the whole point of trying to force him into the conversation with Trump is to create more column inches. Like there's no actual real analysis of how it all works demonstrates it's possibly the worst place to be, and it does nothing but damage your relationship to be there. So this whole. We're getting 10% tariffs from the US, which is apparently the best deal Trump offers. So we don't want to tamper with that. Remind him we've got an AUKUS review, which obviously is, a hand grenade into our defence planning, but that is what it is. And it's significant that review is being undertaken by Colby, who's a US official who has previously voiced concerns about America providing us with nuclear submarines in the way they're currently planning to. So that there's plenty of complexities and difficulties and challenges going on in the US relationship. And most of them, indeed all of them, are caused by the behaviour of the president in the White House. And we just count our lucky stars because while he's busy invading Greenland, taking over Panama, threatening Denmark, we can just get on with the business. So I didn't subscribe to that kind of anti-China hawk anxiety that permeated some journalism over the last week, that we were somehow, selling out or turning our backs to the United States. We are behaving like a rational middle power and pursuing our national interests. And America take note.
Jessie, anything else on China before we move to Next item.
Well, you'd be surprised to hear that I think that leaders should visit China, Stephen. I think that that's a good thing. I thought it was a real shame that he didn't head down to a square in China and make a phone call into a radio station and get an iconic meme for the rest of the country to enjoy. But, hopefully next time. No, I think it was a good thing. I think that exactly as David says, we're acting like a rational middle power. I do find it very enlightening, the approach journalists take to this. There's all the beating of the drum that he shouldn't go, but then when he does go, the bar of expectation they put on what he should bring back is obscene. So there are people who will criticise China and want an end and really make whatever expectation they set unachievable. And I think that the relationship is stronger after he's been there. I think that is good for trade. I think that is good for Australia's national interest. I think it's pleasing he went.
The Prime Minister had an interview last night with Sarah Ferguson on 7:30. And let me say, I think she's an outstanding journalist, and I just voted for her in the Logies, and everyone listening to this should as well.
They still do.
Is the Logies still happening?
They are still happening. Anyway, she interviewed Albo, and it was not an easy interview. Interviews with her never are, but she did sort of try and pursue this issue of, you say you spend a lot of quality time with President Xi. Did you discuss Taiwan? Did you discuss 3.5%? Like, there doesn't seem to be, even amongst our finest journalists, a sufficient comprehension that a lot of these leader-to-leader relationships need to have a certain level of, common sense and confidentiality around them. And if Australia is going to have any hope of influencing the behaviour of a country like China, then turning up and giving them a Liverpool kiss on an issue like the Uyghurs, which no one in the Muslim world seems to care about the Uyghurs, but we're apparently meant to die on a hill for them, then there needs to be a bit of recognition that this relationship is an adult relationship and an important one, and we're going to pursue it in the way that we do. And the fact that we have a strong bilateral relationship with China does not mean we've completely transformed our defence and security arrangements or our alliances or transformed our values. It didn't mean that, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and it doesn't mean that now. It doesn't mean it's a relationship free from challenges, but I thought the trip was a success, and the bar that journalists were setting was unrealistic.
I remember the last Prime Minister who said they were going to shirt front another world leader, and everyone thought that was a bad thing to do. So,
and that went really well, didn't it?
It went really well. And then Trump did actually shirt front other world leaders. He took a leaf out of Tony's book.
Tony diplomacy. It could be a whole doctrine.
There's only so much that you can bring back from China because obviously we have limitations on our duty free. That's like it's 2 bottles and a can of cigarettes. So what did the journalists expect? Parliament returned this week. David, I know you touched on a little bit about it before, but any other thoughts about this first week of our nation's legislators getting back together again?
No, good to see them back. It'll be very interesting, won't it, to see the new dynamics in the Parliament with the sort of 90-plus Labor MPs surrounding on all fronts the Liberals in the House of Representatives, a House of Representatives that doesn't have Adam Bant in it but does have a whole lot of Teals in it. The Teals kind of survived this election and I think are now consolidating themselves as a force in politics. And as I've said before, that's a challenge to the Liberals. It's also a challenge to the Greens to have these Teal faces and voices and modulations occupying the space they think is their own. I think it's going to be very interesting to see the new dynamics at play.
Jessie, it's been 3 months since the election.
Yeah,
what are your thoughts?
I am somewhat torn about the fact that it's taken us 3 months to get back to Parliament. In some ways, I think it is a strategic genius. I think the fact that the Prime Minister has allowed the Liberals to completely tear themselves apart without the distraction of Parliament or any other sort of processing news yarns has really allowed them to air a lot of their grievances. So I think in that sense it's strategically very wise. And I think that the public do want and showed at this election that they want a stable, calm approach to governing. And I think that's kind of what he was exuding with the timeline he set. I am anxious for reform and for change and for progressive things to happen under a Labor government. I do wonder about the impact on the psychology of Labor staffers, of the caucus. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out over the psychology of this term of government, whether the slow and steady start sets them up for a real foundation. And I was very pleased to see the things that the Prime Minister said in his interview yesterday around getting things done, and the public service really need to deliver. This is a delivery term. I think that's excellent. And I'm hoping that is the thrust of the term, and that this sort of this time to get the foundation right pays off and doesn't set a culture of slightly slower pace. That is what I'm hoping for.
It's, they're shorter terms. They're 3-year terms, and sometimes they're not even a full 3 years because of, when you call the election, it sort of shuts it all down. And so on that basis, we're already 10% of the way through the term. It's just compared to, we had obviously Lissy Ratcliffe, your former colleague from the Premier's office, on the show last week and talking about how Daniel got straight into it, but they're 4-year terms in at a state level. So you do have a little bit more time. And I'm just wondering, can they afford to have spent 2 and a bit months off, having a bit of a break before they jumped into the parliamentary season?
Well, just hang on. I don't think we can be sure that that's what's happened.
That they've had a break.
Yeah, well, that it's been a period of intense inactivity.
No, that's what I'm saying. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. In some ways, the ministers come back with new portfolios and hopefully have a much better sense of them and set, and have been able to set direction with their department. I think the question is how this all plays out.
But take childcare, for instance. Childcare has been, for good reason, a hot issue across Victoria in particular, but the country as a whole. Labor has had lots of interesting ideas about how to reform this sector in the can for years. A whole number of previous shadow ministers and ministers have looked at it and worked at it, and I'm familiar with some of those ideas. It'll be very interesting to see what the government tries to do in reforming that area. So hopefully over the last little while we've seen them not simply collect their thoughts, but actually start to map out some serious plans for reform.
No, and that's what I mean. I think the proof will be in the pudding in sort of 6 months about how this start to the term plays out. And I have high hopes for it. But I do think it is a question of which way they've leaned.
Someone we don't have high hopes for is Mark Latham. He's back in the news again. Really unfortunate story. I'm just interested to. Just thinking about that man's photo is on the caucus wall in Canberra in Parliament, alongside Billy Hughes and a couple other people that we probably aren't too keen on now. But David, you remember the caucus, not when Latham was there, but I just want to get your reflections on the news that came out this week about the AVO against him by his former partner.
Well, I thought the Labor caucus handled this in a good way, actually. I don't support ripping down old statues, and I don't support ripping down old portraits. You've got to you could critique your history, but you've got to understand your history. You can't deny and censor your history. He was a Labor leader. We should all be deeply embarrassed by that fact, but it doesn't change the fact that it's a fact. I'm reminded of his election, actually. I was thinking about this story in recent days. I remember many years ago I was sitting at my desk. I was then the Director of Strategy in the office of Premier Brax, and a friend of mine from Canberra, who will remain nameless, rang me and said, oh, mate, there's leadership, there's contests underway, Beasley versus Latham, and I'd like you to try and persuade some of my colleagues up here in Canberra to vote for Kim. And I remember saying, oh, come on, mate, I'm really busy, and you're going to win this in a canter. Obviously Kim's going to win. There is no other reasonable choice. You're just wasting my time. And he said, no, I'm not. Wouldn't believe it. It's going to be close. I said, oh, bullshit. anyway, eventually, in a lethargic way, I got onto the phone and rang a couple of my friends in the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party and was astonished to discover they were voting for Mark Latham.
Who are they? Name them.
I won't name them, but they know, and I know, and they know I know. And I mean, he got a majority, which is just inconceivable. And everybody who voted for him is obviously not putting that on their CV, are they? Deeply humiliating. I loved Albo last night on 7:30 when he was asked about this, and he said, well, I didn't support him then. I didn't want him. I didn't like him. And I was sitting there on my couch saying, too bloody right, I'm the same. And I did, at the time, because I couldn't help myself, did say in the media at the time that this was an intelligence test for the Labor Party and the Labor Party just failed. And that remains true. What a scandalous insult. Now, as it turns out, Latham was a far more dastardly, undesirable, revolting human being than we even knew then. And his conduct, becoming a one nation politician, the sleaze, the scat, like a revolting tale, and a salutary tale. Again, reminds me of something my father said to me, which is that the Australian people never make a mistake. And in 2004, the Labor Party spent millions of dollars trying to make this bloke Prime Minister. Yeah. But the people of Australia never make a mistake, even when we do. So a tawdry episode highlighting a poor bit of decision-making by the great Australian Labor Party.
Jessie, do you share David's sentiments about our history and how we need to own it?
Yeah, so I think I agree that it was a good plan to add an annotation down the bottom of his portrait. I think that there's quite a few people in the Labor Party who would like to add some other annotations to some other people that are sitting up on the wall. Someone texted me, can we finally put the rat underneath Billy Hughes now? Like it's... Anyway, I do think it was a good
assessment for everybody.
just everyone gets a texter and is able to. But I do think it's good. I also think him looking at the caucus is a reminder about poor decision making.
Exactly,
and I think that is very useful. I also think
we should make everyone who voted for him stand there and stare at it.
You'd be pleased to know in 2004 I did. 2003 he got elected leader. Yes. 2003?
2004 was his election, yeah.
Yeah, I was doing politics. I was doing politics in high school, and our local member Catherine King came in to our to do her little chat with the politics class, and she was expecting, I think, some pretty, standard questions about how politics worked. And I asked her who she voted for the internal election of leader, Kim Beazley or Mark Latham, and she did not answer the question, which I thought was outrageous, which made me think she probably voted for Kim, and she couldn't say it. So I will defend Catherine on that. So I
go back and check.
I think that was a good thing. I do think also though, and David's comments make me wonder. I support a leadership ballot of the membership. I do wonder and worry sometimes though about the space between a leader and the membership and the understanding a caucus can get of a human that the membership can't.
Yeah, but hang on a minute. Latham was elected by the parliamentary party. The
caucus without the leadership ballot. No,
the membership
absolutely
did not get a say in it. Yeah.
No, and this is kind of my point. I've looked at different megalomaniac leaders, and I have a view that sometimes the caucus have a much better sense of these things and do need the capacity for a ripcord to sort of say this person is insane and we shouldn't follow them. But Latham is actually the cautionary tale in the other direction, that caucus got it wrong and perhaps the membership wouldn't have. And I think it is an interesting thing for the Labor Party. I'm not suggesting we overturn our rules or anything like that. I think they've added a lot of stability to the party. But I do think it is an interesting dynamic that the caucus have a much better sense. And a lot of caucus members now are sort of saying he wasn't this crazy when he was the leader of the Labor Party. He didn't act like that, which is, I hope, true. But I am interested in the proximity of the leader and the caucus and how that all plays out.
But it speaks to the fact that at that moment, the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party was deeply divided between two personality cliques, both of which were cross-factional, actually. And one personality clique sort of operated around Kim Beazley, and it included Albo, it included, what did they call them, the Three Musketeers? What was it? Swan, Smith and Conroy. And then there was another clique around Latham, which included Simon Crean, which included Julia Gillard. And those cliques were at odds. And I sort of, when I entered the Parliamentary Party in 2008, we were sort of, the embers of that were still there, of that division. Between those two cliques. The time and personnel change hadn't completely eradicated it. But it speaks to the fact that those divisions in the caucus had ceased to really be able to make sensible judgments about the future of the Parliamentary Labor Party. It was just anybody but someone from the opposite group. Eventually the Labor Party kind of was obliged to go back to Kim Beazley because Latham sort of self-immolated in the aftermath of losing the 2004 election. And, Kim Beazley's the greatest Prime Minister we never had. But there's a lot of good lessons in there for Labor and the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party. And as you say, Jessie, how the leader should be elected might be one of them. Yeah,
it's interesting. But I will say, when the story came out, a friend texted me saying, I saw this headline about Latham and I thought, media beat things up. I'm going to need to read the detail of this and what happened. And then I was halfway through it and I thought, why is there so much detail? I need far less detail in all of this.
Yes.
Shocking. Poor woman.
Awful.
Okay, let's go to the main event, which is the Tasmanian election, which was held on Saturday just gone. Background for those of you not paying attention to Tasmanian politics. Recently, the Liberal Premier in Tasmania lost a vote of no confidence in the Tasmanian lower house a month ago when his government couldn't secure votes of a crossbench because they were in a minority government. This led to fresh elections, and Labor has, it appears, basically still voting's been counted, but the Liberals will have to form another minority government. They don't have enough votes to form a majority. They're going to rely on the crossbench again. And we'll talk more about this in a moment, but there's sort of a conversation right now about the Liberal Party getting first dibs, and if they can't form a minority government with the crossbench, then Labor can have a crack. The state of play as it is, there's 18 seats to form government. There are still 3 in doubt. The Liberal Party had a 3.2% swing on its primary, which took its primary to 39.9, but that's at the time of recording, and that will change. They've won 14 seats. Labor had a 3.2% swing against its primary. They're on 25.8. It probably actually might be bumped up to 26 now. The Tasmanian Greens had 0.5% swing against them on primary. They're down around about 14%. And the others, which is basically all the independents and crossbenchers, had a 2.1% swing against them. They're down to 18.3. They've got 4 seats. As I said, there's 3 more seats still in doubt. Jessie, to you first. How do you see this playing out for Labor, and maybe some context to what happened last time? This is like the second election we've had since. There was an election last March in which, I'll let you give the context, and then sort of I want to get your thoughts about how.
Well, the context actually goes all the way back to when Nick McKim was the leader of the Greens, and Labor decided to form a minority parliament with them. I think that is actually where the context and the cultural approach to this comes from in Tasmanian Labor. I'm pretty confident that's who the Green leader was, but I'd have to go back and have a look. But Labor in Tasmania has a very strong view about not forming government with the Greens. It has been formed many years ago when they did it. They thought it was a disaster. I think that they then looked at the minority government that Julia Gillard led and came to a similar conclusion, and they have just been flat out against it. And I think, I appreciate and understand where they're coming from, and you can't ignore that historical context when making decisions. When it came to the last election, Rebecca White, there is conflicting stories about what happened, and I don't have the inside running on what did or didn't. The story goes that she goes to admin to have a conversation about what negotiation parameters could be looked at if we're in a minority if we get the opportunity given the result. And she was summarily dismissed as leader and told, we won't be forming a minority government, you won't be the leader anymore, which seemed insane to me. And particularly, I do think of Beck White right now in terms of how everyone is looking at this and think, God, she must just be grinding her teeth. Having said that, she's an assistant minister in the federal government, so maybe she's just very happy.
Yeah, after delivering a great result to Labor in the seat of Lions, which is a tough bit of real estate.
Exactly. So maybe she's happy days. But I do think there does, again, I'm not a Tasmanian and it's very easy for me to lecture from the outside, but just looking at the result, there does need to be a re-examination of the idea that Labor will not form a minority government. If Tasmania keeps throwing up results, not unlike they do in the ACT, where at different points Labor has not been able to govern in its own right, but the crossbench are clearly progressive, there is a progressive vote there. Does that just mean that Labor says the Liberals are the biggest party, so they just keep getting to govern and try and negotiate with the progressive crossbench? And I think Dean's approach to saying they get first go, but if the crossbench don't want to go with them, it is incumbent on me to have a conversation with them about what a collaborative parliament can look like, because going back to the polls is clearly not what the public want. Challenging given the result for Labor and the swing against. But, if you look at it as did people vote for the Liberal Party as a result of not voting for Labor, I wouldn't say it's a repudiation of to the left of centre politics. It was a rise of a bunch of progressives and single issue politicians would be my take. So I think that the approach to say the Libs get first crack is absolutely appropriate and the right thing to do. But I also think that if the Tasmanian crossbench determined that's not what they want to do, Labor can't just say, all right, we go back to an election. I don't think that's reasonable.
David, I know, hindsight's a beautiful thing, but I just wonder about if you go back to when the Labor Party first moved this motion of no confidence in the Tasmanian Premier, which then led to this snap election. Someone said to me, it's like the moment when the dog finally caught the car. I just wonder how prepared Labor was for this. I mean, the party is still in administration. The branch is not cashed up resource-wise. They've just come out of a federal election. Tasmanians just went to the polls in May. I know it was for a federal election. They just voted last March for a state election. I wondered how well this was going to go down. Like I said, 2020's, hindsight's 2020. I wonder in this moment if you could redo this again, do you play the long game? Do you say, look, obviously the Liberal government is struggling with a crossbench. They're having issues with a budget. Let's let them go through those challenges for the next 4 years and we play the long game, get our house in order and build for the election in 2028. I know, like I said, but when you're in opposition, you want to get back into government, so you take your opportunities. But I just want to get your reflections on how this is all played out now that we know what happened with this election, because basically nothing changed.
Well, I think next time Tasmanian Labor leader Dean Winter says, I have a cunning plan, Baldrick, everybody should take one step back. This is a home goal, isn't it? I mean, this is a motion of no confidence and bringing down a government and forcing an election where you get a slap in the face rather than an election victory. And the fact that it comes so closely on the heels of a really successful Labor performance in Tasmania in the federal election, I think somehow it just makes it worse, because we obviously know that there is swathes of Tasmania who are prepared to vote for Labor when they see the case made. But here, there's a lot of Tasmanians that just voted Labor at the federal election but did not at the state level. I think I part company with Jessie around the way forward. I think the idea that, destiny forces you to do a deal with the Greens and get into a big white car and sail off into your new ministerial office will be rewarded with disaster rather than acclaim. I adhere to the notion that if Labor forms a government in Tasmania with the Greens and others, it will just be a Catherine wheel of catastrophe. We've been here before. Greens do not accept the discipline of cabinet. They will move in and out of cabinet deliberations and freely comment on them in the media, undermining cabinet solidarity. Labor will be accused of hypocrisy for having entered into an agreement that it said it would not make. And large parts of the Labor base in Tasmania are very hostile to the Greens because they have directly different interests, salmon industry being an example. So it's all very, very grim. And I don't think.
So what do you think they do? Send them back to an election? Like that's what I mean.
I would have a long, hard look at doing just that.
And then how do you combat the idea that Labor has sent you to 2 elections in a very short period of time?
Well, I mean, the Tasmanian people.
I didn't set up this strategy to start with, Jessie. I can't explain what you do next.
Like, how do you get to Dublin? Well, you don't want to start from here. First thing you do is sit down with the Brains Trust and sack them and get a new Brains Trust. The second thing you do is rewrite the Tasmanian constitution so they don't have this Weimar Republic system of election.
Like the whole Hare-Clark system is just terrible.
They're just asking for it, aren't they? They're just asking for it.
It was made worse in the last parliament, where they increased the size of the parliament to 35 or 36 or whatever the number is. And in doing so, what it meant was
the quota.
With Hare-Clark, the quotas are so much lower. You can get elected in the sixth spot with a primary of around 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 votes. Whereas the person that's winning that particular seat is collecting upwards of got the figures in front of me, like upwards of 30,000 votes. So it's bringing what it means.
But it also shreds party discipline, doesn't it? Because ALP candidates, I've seen this up close. In Tasmania, ALP candidates all head into the safe Labor areas and fight with each other for the base vote. Because there's no point having any discipline around a ticket because of their Robson's rotation.
No, and this is the strength of the ACT branch, which I don't often say.
No, in fact, that might be the first time I've heard that sentence.
In the Hare-Clark system, they make it very clear, and they've done all the numbers, you are a candidate, these are your suburbs. If you are caught door knocking in some other suburb, you will be shot. Like, these are the suburbs. Everyone gets a proportionate Labor suburb, and then they get the other suburbs. And the idea of increasing the broad vote, not just everyone heading to – and I think it's been very successful. To my brain, the whole
thing is bananas.
Well, the interesting
single-member electorates like God intended. That's what I say.
Well, I think that it allows for more representative democracy, actually knowing who your MP is and who you can blame if things don't happen. But anyway, sorry, Stephen.
Oh, and I was going to say, you're right.
You get a government as well.
The example of the ACT is an example in which Hare-Clark can notionally work. I'm not making an argument for Hare-Clark. I'm just saying that the ACT party
if the party take it seriously, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But it's clearly not being – and expanding the size of the parliament meant there's a whole bunch of numpties that have got into parliament. And so you're the premier of a state within our federation, and you're negotiating – You're negotiating with absolute crazies.
You've got all of the legitimacy of Yarra Council.
Now, if any of those people are listening, Stephen does not speak for the Tasmanian branch, and he doesn't think that you're numpties. And if we form government with you, we would like to
independence.
That's what I'm talking about too.
Oh, right, yes. Oh no, look. I said to you, David, Jessie refuses to watch the film Flying High, or Aeroplane as it's known in the United States. So there's so many different quotes from that film that apply to politics, and this is one in this case, which is that scene when the plane is obviously the news have found out that the plane has now been flown by a pilot, not by a pilot. That everyone's sick, and there's a passenger that's flying a plane. They're going to land in Chicago, and the news spreads, and then it gets that guy called Counterpoint who says. Turns to the camera and says they bought their tickets. They knew what they were getting into. I say, let them crash. And that's what I say about the Tasmanian government in their relationship with these numpties in the crossbench. Let them have 4 years of insanity and then watch the voters come flowing back to Labor to say, oh, my God, that was a disaster. You know, that's the long game strategy I'd be playing. And then when you get into government, get rid of Hare Clark and go back to how you should be running it properly.
And remember, when Labor did govern with the Greens in Tasmania, because we've tried this before, it ended with, just as you say, Stephen, everybody coming out of their homes and clubbing us to death like baby seals and electing a Liberal government. So we know how this story ends.
I just think that Labor can't entirely deal themselves out in a state and
you
say
just keep going back to the polls till you get it right.
Yeah. All right. The long game is like 40 years long, just so we know.
All right, we're going to go in circles. Let's move on. Thank you so much. Tasmania, we won't talk about you hopefully for another 6 weeks until you have another election. You're like Italy. Okay, now next segment, communication breakdown with Jessie McCrone. There's an opportunity here for Jessie who's been looking at some quality or not quality comms over the last month and give us your reflections on such a thing.
Okay, so I want to talk about a newspaper article and accompanying video that has really annoyed the crap out of me. It's from the SMH's Nick Bonardi, and I think it's clickbait dressed up as media commentary. It's overblown, it's misinformed, and oddly hostile to Australian politics and how it actually works.
You'd think that 15 years since the Arab Spring, politicians would have got that social media can make or break a government. It's just not happening here.
What's your reflections on the first part that you heard?
Like, to start with, if your benchmark for political comms is the Arab Spring and jump cuts, like, honestly, we need to talk. This is ridiculous. Political communication is about authenticity, it's about clarity, and it's about consistency. It is not about gimmicks, not stunts, and not chasing the algorithm, which a lot of people, I would say, in the comments have made clear that I don't want a clout chaser as an MP. I want someone who actually knows what they're doing. And I think that this idea that we're going to look to some of the more odd expressions of political communication from overseas and say that Australians should do it is just a fundamental misunderstanding about how our system works. To start with, the video criticising Australian politicians and how they use social media is 1 minute and 50 seconds long.
Oh, that's short, isn't it?
Like, I actually think that it's some sort of meta explanation of what not to do. Like, while criticising how this communication method works, he has then done all of the things that he says is poor communication. And I don't know if he's just trolling the rest of us by this format, but it drove me absolutely batty. Like, so his main person he talks to from politics in the article is Max Chandler Mather. And he talks about how he harnessed social media to become a massive loser. Like, he lost. He absolutely got destroyed. And the idea that he was in some way an exemplar of political communication, like, it defies belief. So I'm going to go through a couple of things that in a communications frame that I think we should understand out of this. One, virality is not the same as persuasion. And I think that both major parties have understood this, that just because something has got a lot of engagement doesn't necessarily mean that it shifts votes. And that is something that both major parties in Australia have understood, that they have to campaign to everyone, and persuading them is more important than just having them hear about you. He says that there's no one in federal parliament doing digital comms well. I just think that's blatantly false. As Reid Fleming, digital expert, has said on your podcast, Stephen, there have been some excellent people in Australia doing it well. I think that Josh Burns, and I'm not just going to name my friends, but I'm going to name two of them, Josh Burns and Annika Wells, doing a phenomenal job. And I think part of it is they've grown up with it. They're younger than the rest of the caucus. They have like they're digital natives, and I think that comes across. But I would say they're not creating the same content, and it is both matched to their personalities and how they communicate. It's authentic. It is like them. And then you've got Dan Rechapoli, who is doing it the best, I think, out of anyone, who similarly is not doing it like either of the other two, but is communicating a message to his electorate in his voice. And just because he isn't jumping into a freezing water and talking about rent freezes doesn't mean that his political communications isn't good. The article equates stunts with strategy, which is just fundamentally an incorrect understanding of how communications works. He misses that someone like, I don't know, and I know that I'm going to sound biased here, but Daniel Andrews did a phenomenal job of social media, and he just sort of ignores him and Jacinta Ardern, who both took very different approaches to social media, but both garnered huge followings and were able to be very persuasive. Cut me off at any point because I have many others that I could like to make this article. I think it romanticizes the algorithm as having some sort of sense of political swaying of people. Like this is an algorithm that is set by foreigners to start with, but people that are not looking for political content or persuading people of ideas. So the idea that you should become a slave to the algorithm as opposed to the message that you're trying to get across is just also a bananas idea. And the whole crux of looking at Mandamni and saying, why aren't politicians doing that here? I'm just like, he was running in a primary. He wasn't even running in a general. He was also running in a non-compulsory system.
And against a deeply disgraced individual in Cuomo.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. But yeah, he had some good communications methods, but he was also working in a different electoral area. I found it condescending. I found it just like this cultural cringe about how Australians can't possibly doing anything well. I will point out to him that other Western social democratic parties do come to Australia to talk to us about how we're doing social media. And I think that in the end, if Australians had a choice between watching some guy throw himself in an ocean to talk about a rent freeze versus having universal health care, they would back the system, compulsory voting, that provides that instead of the political content that Americans get.
Let me get my 2 cents worth in. The first thing is I want to quote that notorious progressive Roger Ailes, who was the founder of Fox News, who said something like, and I'm going to mangle this, I think, but he said something like, if you're filming an orchestra and one of them gives the finest performance ever, and the other one, the conductor loses his balance and falls into the pit, the one that's going on the nightly news is the one where the guy fell in the pit. And the point is, that's the algorithm, isn't it? It's not looking for virtue or excellence or sublime performance. It's looking for disaster and notoriety. And so the journalist is not just simply inviting us to be enslaved to an algorithm. It's inviting us to be enslaved to an algorithm which is completely agnostic about political virtue or causes. And this is because
discipline.
Journalists for the most part, believe that politics is about entertainment. It's not about public policy and good government and political virtue. And so this journalist is looking at the universe through a lens of what is the most interesting. It's a shame for all of us that he didn't just remain fixated with cat videos but found politics at all. But he did find politics. And this sort of banal article is the consequence of it. And we have to resist this idea that politics is purely entertainment because, as Jessie very correctly says, virality might be the message that kills you. It might be the mistake, the error. It might be the moment you fall into the orchestra pit. The fact that gets retweeted 5 million times is not a sign that you're doing well.
In comms, people only ever talk about the positive message. People don't know the amount of crap you've managed to keep out of like, and arguably that is the real secret to comms. It's the stuff you don't say or don't see. Sorry, David, go on.
No, well, my final point here is just about our party system. And Jessie, you kind of made this point already, but idealising, this is a journalist who's idealising sort of two outlandish progressive politicians from the left, or indeed from the far left, in Max Mather, Brither Bullington III. These guys are sorts of journalists who will, sorts of characters who will appear to Fairfax journalists and get idealised by them, but they do that because that's their own political bias. But in the Australian political context, the kinds of stuntification that this journalist is exhorting is not necessarily encouraged by our parties in particular, because there's that old saying in US politics that politicians choose their parties, and in Australia parties choose their politicians. In the United States, these politicians are pretty much independents in terms of how they get elected and how they promote themselves. And they can do whatever they please in a media sense. Well, that is not how it works in the party system here in Australia. So there is a discipline overlay that is demanded by the parties of its MPs, to which this journalist seemed oblivious.
Well, certainly oblivious to the success of them. So just to go to the second clip.
A lot of the party's messages just don't cut through because they're tacking towards the centre, while parties on the fringes can get excluded from politics because of preference deals.
Yeah, you're right. That does make me angry.
Yeah. Sorry.
This is a trot. What's the name of this trot?
He's the deputy political editor for the SMH. This isn't bad comms advice. This is just bad political analysis.
This is the convener of the Victorian
Preference
Socialists.
deals do not exclude minor parties. In fact, in most instances, that's how they actually get elected. Also, to get preferences, you also have to get votes, which means engaging, persuasive messaging that you have to pitch to everyone. So
this guy's been listening to Adam Bant in 2025 and not Adam Bant in 2010, isn't it?
So if you read the article, it's not as enraging as the video, because the article is written like mostly this is analysis, I've spoken to blah, and this is sort of but then in the video he certainly makes it seem as though he is personally giving this advice to everyone. And
why isn't someone like Archer reviewing this stuff? Like, where's the sub-editors in this? There's some quality brains at the SMH. Why are they taking a holiday?
Anyway,
and letting this guy from the Victorian Socialists edit all their material.
I don't want to make this sound like that politicians shouldn't try things. Like, I do think they should. I think that interesting ways to communicate they are something we should explore. And I do think that there are politicians doing that. There should be more doing it. I just think the idea that jump cuts are the way to engage this whole and this part of the electorate is just such terrible analysis. Anyway, that's my comms take.
Okay, let's get to our monthly categories, and just a reminder to the folks at home: Tory/True Tory with a typewriter award, Melbourne Inga, I'm in over my head award, or basically I've just had a shocker of a week award, and probably unanswered questions, and there's some stuff in mailbox, but I'm just conscious of the time, so we'll see if we can get to mail this week. We might actually do just one big mail episode. Starting with Tory of the Typewriter Award, Jessie, you got a nomination.
Yeah, I just went on a rant though, so I feel like, well, here we go again. My nomination is Chip LeGrand, and I promise that this isn't just like an episode where I'm picking on Fairfax as a outlet, but his approach to the Suburban Rail Loop has just been obscene. Because at this point, Chip is not reporting on the SRL; he's running a campaign against it. And like, if you actually look at the three things that involved in a campaign: a clear objective, creating urgency, and trying to communicate it on every platform you can. Like, Chip is doing that against a project. First of all, he's declared that this needs to be stopped, ignoring the fact that it's gone to 3 elections and been, supported everyone in them. And the poll in the Australian the other week that demonstrated more liberals support the the SRL than the Liberal Party and the fact that it is broadly supported by every different cohort, apart from those that are possibly of the view they're not going to be alive when it's completed. Chip has just put this deadline and said it needs to stop before tunnelling begins. He's completely ignoring contractual arrangements. He's ignoring a whole bunch of it. He's just declaring that there is a 6-month window that remains open that government can walk away from this because I've said so, essentially. Then he's declared the urgency by saying that there's tunnel boring machines being shipped from China and we'll be able to stop them. And once we stop them at the border, we won't have to continue with this project. And then he's hit a bunch, like he's actually gone on radio on 3AW to start campaigning against this thing. Like, this is not journalism. And to some extent, like, have a crack at SRL. I don't care. But don't pretend it's journalism. Like, get on the ballot like everyone else if you have a view like this. Campaign in the system that you're supposed to. Don't go to a newspaper and use it as a platform as though you're some sort of impartial journalist. You hate this project. You hate it, amusingly, because we announced it on Facebook, which one of your colleagues in Sydney thinks that more should be done. So if you want to have a chat to him, it's really annoyed me. I think he's a Tory with a typewriter.
Yeah, massive shame on you, Chip Legrand. And it's reminiscent of the Ages campaign against the dredging of Port Phillip Bay.
And that was a success, wasn't it? Wow, the
environmental damage that was going to happen to the dredging, and why would we want Victorians to get more exports and imports into our docks by having a deeper port was beyond the age.
I just wanted to say one thing about the SRL, though, which is that there was a poll recently. I don't know if you saw it. I think it might have been in The Age, but there was a poll.
No, The Age aren't publishing polls on it. I think because they keep getting them back and it's wildly popular.
Yeah. Well, maybe it must have been News Corp then, but there was a poll where the paper very reluctantly had to report widespread popularity for it. I thought it was interesting.
And isn't it also true that The Age or Fairfax papers refuse to allow people to write pro-SRL arguments in their editorial, in their
I do know some people that have pitched up op-eds and there has been no interest in them. And then the other day, it was a while ago, I saw this op-ed anti-it from this guy that I looked up who has had many different opinion articles he puts on his blog about buses and so forth that The Age has not been interested in at all. And suddenly he writes one that's anti-SRL. And I think they put him on a pointer on the front page to this analysis from this transport expert that we have not published at any other point about any other topic.
My enemy's my friend. Okay.
Well, with the Tory on a typewriter, I'll put in a late entrant.
Go for it.
Which is Patrick Hannaford, digital reporter at Sky News, that well-known destination of record. At what cost? Victorian opposition dismisses poll showing support for Suburban Rail Loop, warning the project is a debt bomb. So this is what I like about this article is the calisthenics involved. It's more fun than watching my kids at Twister. Here we've got the Victorian opposition being asked for its opinion about the poll. No one else cares what they think. They're busy suing each other. But Sky cares what they think. Let's go to the Victorian opposition. And they've dismissed the poll that shows they're wrong and said it's a debt bomb. And that's the headline. This is working hard to get the Victorian Liberal opposition into a story when, in fact, the headline should be, despite all of our efforts, this wretched suburban rail loop remains popular with the community.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Now let's go to our next award, which is the Melbourne I'm In Over My Head Award. We've actually got a nomination from Pax, who's one of our Patreon subscribers. Thank you, Pax. He or she has, or they have said that the In Over My Head Award should go to Keir Starmer. Whenever I have an issue with the ALP, I look over to the UK Labor and sigh a massive relief. No party discipline, no overarching guiding plan. Greens are basically inside the party, and worst of all, that Tony Blair disconnected union power with New Labor. Thankfully, we still have the real Workers' Party left here, the only real Workers' Party left here in Australia, which is the ALP. Thank you, Pax, for your nomination there.
Wise words, Pax.
I'm going to have to defend Blair, though, because I'm perhaps one of the only people left doing it, but not for his union separation, but for, winning. But go on, Steve.
I know, this is a probably Tony Blair podcast for sure. But we're going to have to get John McTiernan on or someone, I tell you, just to get an update about what the hell's going on with the Labor Party over in the UK, because it's not looking great right now. They had the massive revolt against the policy around the welfare reform, which in itself sounds like a stupid idea. So when you get like 140 MPs walking out of your own party, it's a problem.
I mean, the government's barely a year old, and it's running third in the polls behind the Conservative Party and Reform. And the big story in UK politics is Reform, and the engine that's driving Reform is broad dissatisfaction with the United Kingdom's immigration policies and a complete inability of the centre-left in the United Kingdom to even talk about the subject, let alone recognise that it needs thought and reform. So UK politics is desperately depressing.
Yeah.
Stephen and I caught up recently with someone from the UK Labor Party. I didn't realise that there's like a third of the caucus were actually they're Keir's people. Like that, they were selected by this leader. So the fact that a third of the caucus had turned on them, a third of them are supposed to be his people to start with. Like I'm very worried about the state of. Like I was worried before, but then to find out that these people were all hand selected by the leader also.
But nothing kills discipline in a government than the certainty of 50% of its MPs that if they stay the course, they'll lose their seats.
Yeah,
that's the brutal truth of it.
I don't like that.
And, Reform are winning councils and winning by-elections. And the Conservative Party hasn't been able to rebuild its credentials. And Labor, I mean, the idea that Farage could be Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is not as absurd as it sounds. It is possible without a change of course.
The one of the things I think I take sort of hope from is that their terms are so long over there. They're 5 years, so you've got so much time to actually kind of turn around. So hopefully the local government elections, which were terrible for Labor, and this revolt around the welfare bill, hopefully will jolt the leadership into action and start to recorrect their direction. I've got a nomination for In Over My Head award. It goes to the Australian Greens this week. Drew Hutton, who was a co-founder of the Australian Greens, was expelled by the Queensland Party of the Greens over comments around it's been reported over comments around transgender policies. He's labelled the party as an authoritarian cult, and support from peers like Bob Brown, who's also a co-founder of the party, was overridden by a 75-23 majority expulsion. But I understand that he was actually, there was a rule within the party itself that the reason why they expelled him, and it wasn't around the issue of transgender, but it was. I think Jessie, you can tell me more about it.
He was. So from what I understand, it's really hard because, as much as they go on about transparency, the Greens quite famously won't let anyone into their conferences and all that sort of stuff. So my understanding is he was not technically expelled for transphobic views. He was expelled for not being prepared to delete comments critical of the Queensland Greens on his Facebook, thus creating a platform for people to be critical of the party, which I think is actually probably more disturbing than throwing him out for being transphobic. I just that goes to his point about
free speech,
the authoritarian rule. Yeah.
Yes, he's meant to delete the comments of non-party members on a public social media page. I think this story is really interesting. The Saturday paper carried quite an in-depth discussion of this issue in March. And the Australian newspaper is now following it with the kind of gusto you could expect of the Australian. But this really goes to the fact that, and I've said this before, that the Greens have become the vessel for woke political activists, which is a blessing for the Labor Party because it means that the woke mind virus has not inhabited the Labor Party like it has inhabited the British Labor Party and the American Democrats. But we really now see this is a seminal moment, I think, for Larissa Walters and the Greens leadership, because if these new Puritans are allowed to dominate the Greens in the authoritarian way that they desire, and excommunicate anyone who has contrary views or even seeks to discuss contrary views, then the Greens party is not going to be the party of climate. It's going to be the party of trans activists. And if Larissa doesn't walk back from this, this will be a defining issue of her leadership. You might remember a comparatively short time ago, Linda Gale, the Victorian president of the Greens, was forced to, her election was declared null and void by a star chamber led by Senator Rice, and she ultimately was forced to stand down from the position of president of the Greens. Linda Gale, being an official of the National Tertiary Education Union, long-standing university trot, daughter of two very famous communist activists in South Australia who made a name for themselves fighting apartheid. She was, communist royalty in this country, driven out of the Greens, driven out of the presidency. And what was her sin? Her sin was to put out a discussion paper suggesting that trans rights needed to be balanced with the rights of biological women that have been secured over the years, including, gender-only places, gender-only activities. She didn't even have a position on it. She just suggested the matter needed to be discussed and considered, and for that was driven from the party. So this illiberal behaviour by these crazed doctrinaire new Puritans, it could be a defining moment for the Greens. And in the Labor Party, we should all be looking at it very carefully, A, so that we don't make this mistake ourselves, and B, so that we stand ready to exploit the fact that the Greens are going to disappear up their own fundament as they fight amongst themselves on these arcane issues of, queer doctrine or critical race theory or whatever it might be, and leave the people of Australia behind.
Yeah, because I do think this issue goes beyond, this challenge for the Greens goes beyond the issue of trans rights. I think even in the defection of Dorinda Cox, we saw the challenges within the Greens of dealing with conflict at all. It's not something that their structures are well set up to moderate and to come through with any sort of sense of collectivism. And I think we saw this with the referendum about the yes vote and advocating for it. It became this befuddling issue for the Greens. And let's face it, they sat out of that whole referendum. They pretended, they put out a couple of media statements. There was no full-blown activation from the Greens machine to support a yes vote at the referendum. So, it's not as though to slightly err from where David is. It's not as though these topics aren't important and shouldn't be discussed. I think that it just shows that structurally the Greens are going to fall in the weight of themselves. Of Puritan is one way to put it, that they are so absolutist about everything that it is very challenging to bring some sort of consensus to anything. I similarly thought that Larissa Waters was going to be a leader who was able to do that. I think that she is far more palatable to the electorate than some of the other Greens that have been put forward before. But, Christine Milne and Bob Brown went in to defend Hutton and sort of speak to the fact that the party needs to be able to have these conversations. And Larissa Waters has backed the party. And I tend to think
But they haven't just expelled Drew Hutton, the co-founder of the Greens. They've expelled 70 people.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
And these people are, for the most part, left-wing feminists who won't subscribe to trans ideology. They may have a view about women's only bathrooms or right. Yeah. So this doctrinal civil war, about how many angels you can put on the tip of a pin, this kind of thing is going to derange the Greens, and they're not talking about climate when they're having a bitter civil war over trans activists.
I think what I find amazing about this whole story is that off the back of your worst election results in the history of your party, this is how you go about trying to reset. If you want to replace the Australian Labor Party as the main centre-left or left-wing political party in this country, which is their ambition, then they have to embrace some fundamentals of being a big tent party, and that requires pluralism. And this party does not want that. They don't want dissent. Like the Labor Party, we've had, we're 130 years old. We've had splits in the past, and I think we've learned from those lessons in that we need to be a pluralist party where you can have differing opinions, but we all remain within the same tent because we've all got the same agreement on the project that we're working towards, which is social.
Well, we have a factional system which tries
absolutely, but
in its own clumsy way to manage that too.
I'm not saying it's perfect. No one has got the blueprint on how to manage dissent within an organisation, but you still have to enable people to dissent. There are plenty of people in our party that don't agree with one another on a whole raft of different issues, but we all stick together and we all work towards a common goal, which is
we have a collectivist culture.
Labor governments. The Greens are miles away from that. They are miles away from it. And right now they're heading in the wrong direction. And I'm here for it because this is going to be the death of them if they keep this up. There'll be no one left.
I think they have a fundamental misunderstanding of plurality as well, in the sense that they think that makes them the Labor Party, and it doesn't. So I think that they are resistant to the idea of coming to this sort of collectivist view because they don't want to become the Labor Party. They want to replace us, as you said. But I think it fundamentally misunderstands that just because you have a system to deal with dissent and discussion doesn't mean that you are the party you're trying to replace.
Okay, let's go on to our last category, which is probably unanswerable questions. Jessie, you've got a nomination this week, which is what's going on in the federal seat of Bradfield.
Yeah, I think that will the Libs be successful in their challenge of Bradfield? I think that for those of you who haven't paid attention, they are mounting a legal challenge to the seat where they lost by 26 votes. The case has been lodged with the High Court. It's currently with the Court of Disputed Returns. So to be clear, the Libs are not claiming fraud or misconduct at the election. They have been at pains to point that out. What they want to do is focus on a small number of line ball ballots. They have the view that a previous vote went the Liberals' way, which suggests that there is some question about some of these line ball ballots. So that's actually what the court will be discussing.
I hope the Liberal Party is successful.
Well, I think it's interesting because
there to be a new election. Can you imagine? If they succeed in getting a re-election in Bradfield, what's going to happen?
Well, there's 3
They're going to turn
options.
up with Susan and get smashed. They're going to spend a fortune and they're going to get smashed.
They're going
to get smashed by the Teals who spend a fortune. Everyone's going to spend a fortune in Bradfield except the Labor Party. Good luck.
There are 3 options. They can uphold the result, and let's face it, the likelihood is they are. Like the member at the moment is being sworn in. Like she acts as though she's the member of Bradfield until the court says she's not. They can declare a different winner. And I would imagine, look, I know the New South Wales division of the Liberal Party are an absolute disaster, but I imagine that they're coming to this court with the actual ballots that they think should have gone a different way burned into their retinas.
You shouldn't.
And I assume there is a good reason that they're saying these 50 ballots are the difference. Anyway, if they're a professional party at all, this is not just some sort of Hail Mary.
That poor Victorian guy Batten as he sort of wanders out every day and instead of attacking the Labor government, he has to explain the latest court case.
And probably I'm wrong, but generally you'd like to think if they are specifically challenging line ball calls, they have a view that this election should have gone a different way. So it may just be they declare a different winner. Otherwise,
I want them to win. I want a re-election.
You want them to call another election WA Senate style.
Yeah, too right. They'll have a re-election. Go at it. Let's get Suzanne out again. Her first test as leader against Climate 200. Go for it.
Who knows what the court's going to do because you can never predict what the High Court does.
Give them the full 100 days to have their by-election in. It'll shut them up for the remainder of the year.
Okay, that is our probably unanswerable question. Okay, so I am going to make an executive decision here because we're already at an hour and 20. We have got questions from our Patreon listeners, but here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to solicit I'm going to certainly try and get either David or Jessie to come back within this next month to
not a chance.
answer these questions. So one of them, well, obviously David's not doing it by the sounds of it. So Jessie, it might be you.
And this is why you've been given a co-host.
Because I stand up for our patrons.
We've got questions from a bunch of our subscribers on Patreon. We're keeping those, and we'll do an actual episode, an actual mailbag episode. So for anyone else that has got any other questions you want to ask around politics of, by the sounds of it, Jessie or myself, please subscribe to our Patreon community. And then in the chat thing there on the page, you'll see where you can ask questions, and we'll endeavour to answer them. But let's close out today's episode and thank our two monthly guests, David Feeney. Thanks very much for coming on the show and making a wonderful contribution to today's episode.
It's a pleasure to be back on the McCrone Memorandum.
And of that namesake, Jessie McCrone, thank you so much for coming back on the show and making a great contribution to this week's
Great.
episode.
Are we inviting David back next time, or are we doing the transition?
No choice.
At what point are we in?
I'm in the hands of the focus group. You know?
We've invested in David. We bought him a new microphone, so
hang on, guys. Hang on. That's Colbert on the phone again.
Hey, Social Democrats. Thanks for listening. Today's episode was hosted by myself, Stephen Donnelly, and produced by Grace Eyre. If you like the show, please rate us and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And finally, get all the latest updates and bonus content by following Socially Democratic on our social media channels. The links are in our show notes. See you next Friday.